You are increasingly pessimistic about this situation. What you just heard from Elon, does that make you even more pessimistic? I can't imagine that would make you more optimistic. At least they're meeting, though.
Well, just take a step back, right? In May, the Treasury Secretary had said we were in the final laps of negotiations. And since that time, we have had no principals meetings between the two sides, and in fact, none are scheduled. So the fact is we've had very, very little progress. Two new things have happened, and both of which Elon just pointed out. One is Huawei and others were added to the Commerce Department entity list, which basically precludes U.S. businesses from selling technology to them. And now the Chinese are tying the concessions that the U.S. will make around Huawei to anything that they are going to do to ultimately resolve the trade dispute. And the second that Elon mentioned, of course, is now this increased political enmity on both sides of the hill around China, and making that potentially more difficult to come to a deal that's ultimately acceptable.
So are you, the Van Hollen-Rubio-Warner mix is interesting. Do you sort of applaud this effort to say, look, if you're serious about Huawei, don't use it as a chit?
Well, Carl, it's a very odd thing, because historically, national security issues were never commingled with trade issues. And by bringing Huawei in at this time when we were in this discussion, and with the administration somehow tethering those two, it makes it very, very difficult. Because what is it that the Chinese government can fundamentally offer from a trade perspective that would alleviate and ameliorate some of these national security concerns? So I do think that is the heart of the complexity.
Stephanie, here's my issue with the way the administration seems to be taking on Huawei. It may very well be a big national security concern, but as you seem to be implying, if it is, then it shouldn't be negotiable, right? And then at the same time, what exactly are the issues with Huawei, aside from this idea that they're too close to the Chinese government, which you could say of not only any China-based company, but any company operating in China, right?
Well, John, that makes exactly for that point makes no sense. John Bolton just came out this weekend and talked about Huawei and said they're fundamentally controlled by the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. You would put a whole swath of the economy in that category. So that shouldn't in itself be sufficient to make them a national security threat. I completely agree. And so as a result of that, I think this has real complexity and has to be evaluated for each individual company and each individual market they're serving.
So if the president says that he wants to keep pressure on the company on Huawei, but he is a big supporter of 5G, where does the U.S. go from here in terms of that race to 5G and if its infrastructure? Are the alternatives in Europe good enough? Can the U.S. still develop its own 5G infrastructure? Yeah,
I don't think, the U.S. companies and the U.S. economy is not really dependent in any way on Huawei and the Chinese economy. It's quite the opposite. And one of the reasons why the Chinese have reacted so strongly to this entity list and these bans is because they are so dependent on U.S. technology and U.S. companies to further develop their economy, which is exactly why China was so focused on this Made in 2025 policy, which is to develop these industries so they do not have their economy, frankly, at risk of U.S. and Western policies, and in this particular case, administration fiat, to basically blacklist their largest technology company in the country.